Professor Gregory Walsh walked into his classroom every morning at exactly 8:15, carrying his leather briefcase in one hand and a cup of black coffee in the other. For 17 years, he had taught music theory at Westbrook University, and in those 17 years, he had built a reputation that students either respected or feared. There was no in-between with Professor Walsh. His classroom walls were covered with portraits of the great composers: Mozart, Beethoven, Chopin, Bach. They stared down at the students like silent judges, reminding everyone who entered that they were stepping into a world of tradition and excellence. Walsh believed in standards. He believed in discipline, and most importantly, he believed that true musical talent came from the right kind of background, the right kind of training, and the right kind of dedication. The fall semester had just begun, and Walsh stood at his desk reviewing his class roster. Advanced music theory, 22 students. Most of them came from families who understood music, who had paid for private lessons since childhood, who had attended summer programs at prestigious academies. These were the students Walsh enjoyed teaching. They spoke his language. They understood what it meant to truly appreciate classical music. Then his eyes landed on a name that made him pause: Devin Carter. He glanced up at the classroom, scanning the faces until he spotted the young man sitting in the very last row by the window. Devin was quiet, his notebook already open, his pen ready, but something about him immediately bothered Walsh, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. Over the next few weeks, Walsh watched Devin carefully. The young man never raised his hand during discussions. While other students eagerly debated the merits of different composers or argued about proper interpretation techniques, Devin simply sat there, writing notes and listening. He always arrived exactly on time. Never early to chat with classmates, never staying late to ask questions. He kept to himself. This silence irritated Walsh more than he wanted to admit. In his mind, students who truly loved music couldn't help but share that passion. They spoke up. They engaged. They showed enthusiasm. Devin's quiet presence felt like indifference, and Walsh took it personally. One afternoon, Walsh assigned an essay analyzing the emotional depth of Chopin's nocturnes. It was a standard assignment, one he had given countless times before. He expected his students to dig deep, to show real understanding, to demonstrate that they could feel the music, not just analyze it technically. When the essays came back, Walsh read through them during his office hours. Most were adequate. A few were excellent. Then he reached Devin's paper. He read it once, then read it again. The writing was good, thoughtful even, but it felt too polished, too careful. It said all the right things, but revealed nothing personal. Walsh made several red marks on the paper and wrote at the bottom, "Correct but uninspired. Music requires passion, not just knowledge." The following Tuesday, Walsh decided to push harder. During class discussion about Beethoven's later works, he suddenly called out, "Devin, perhaps you can share your thoughts on the Moonlight Sonata." What do you think Beethoven was trying to express? Devin looked up, clearly not expecting to be called on. Several students turned to look at him. He cleared his throat softly and said, "I think it's about longing, about wanting something you can't have. There's beauty in it, but also pain, like remembering something precious that's gone." Walsh leaned back against his desk, arms crossed. "Interesting. And where did you read that interpretation? Program notes? A textbook, perhaps?" A few students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Devin's expression remained calm, but his jaw tightened slightly. "No, sir. That's just what I hear when I listen to it." "What you hear," Walsh repeated, his tone making it clear he didn't believe it was Devin's original thought. "Music theory isn't about what we think we hear. It's about understanding structure, composition, the technical mastery required to create such works. These composers spent lifetimes perfecting their craft. True appreciation requires more than casual listening." Devin nodded slowly but said nothing more. Walsh continued with his lecture, but he felt a strange satisfaction from the exchange. He had made his point. Standards mattered. Background mattered. You couldn't just walk into advanced music theory and expect to compete with students who had been groomed for this their entire lives. As weeks passed, Walsh's attention kept returning to Devin. He noticed the young man never participated in the weekly practicum sessions where students could volunteer to perform or analyze recordings together. He never lingered after class to discuss music with other students. He seemed to exist on the periphery of everything, present but not truly part of the community Walsh had built. During one faculty meeting, Walsh mentioned his concerns to some colleagues. I have a student who clearly doesn't belong in advanced theory. No background, no engagement, just taking up space. It's what happens when admissions prioritizes diversity over merit. An older professor, Dr. Helen Martinez, frowned at him. Gregory, do you actually know this student's background? Have you asked him about his musical experience? Walsh waved the question away. I can tell by observation. 17 years of teaching, Helen. You develop instincts about these things. But Helen's question nagged at him. The truth was he hadn't asked. He had assumed, and those assumptions had hardened into certainty in his mind. The semester moved into October, and Walsh assigned a new project. Each student would present a detailed analysis of a major piano work, discussing both its technical demands and interpretive challenges. During the presentation, he asked each student a simple question. Do you play piano? And if so, would you feel comfortable demonstrating any portion of this piece? Most students played at least adequately. A few were genuinely talented. Then it was Devin's turn. He had chosen to analyze Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3, one of the most notoriously difficult pieces in the classical repertoire. Walsh almost laughed when he saw the choice. It seemed absurd, presumptuous even. Devin's presentation was thorough and well-researched. He discussed the technical challenges, the historical context, the emotional arc of the piece. But when Walsh asked the question about playing it, Devin simply said, Yes, sir, I play piano. You play piano, Walsh repeated, his skepticism clear in his voice. And have you ever attempted to play Rachmaninoff's Third? I'm familiar with it, yes, sir. Something in Walsh snapped. The quiet answers, the careful responses, the complete lack of enthusiasm or passion. This student was coasting, hiding, avoiding any real test of his abilities. And Walsh decided right then that he would expose this pretense in front of everyone. Familiar with it, Walsh said slowly, walking to the front of his desk. Well then, Devin, I have a proposition for you. Principal Davidson hosts a monthly assembly for the music department. Faculty, students, sometimes community members attend. I think it would be educational for you to perform there. Let's say the first movement of Rachmaninoff's Third. Unless, of course, that's beyond your capabilities. The classroom went completely silent. Everyone understood what was happening. This wasn't an invitation. It was a challenge, a trap. Walsh was daring Devin to either admit he couldn't play or to embarrass himself trying. Devin looked at Professor Walsh for a long moment. Then he said quietly, When is the assembly, sir? Next Friday. 1 week from today. I'll be there. Walsh smiled, feeling victorious. Excellent. I look forward to it. As students filed out after class, several whispered to Devin, asking if he was really going to do it. But Devin just gathered his books and left without answering. Walsh watched him go, certain that by next Friday, this quiet student would finally learn an important lesson about knowing your place and respecting the standards that truly mattered in the world of classical music. What Professor Walsh didn't know was that Devin had learned to play piano before he learned to read, and the story Devin carried with him was one that would soon change everything. The news spread through Westbrook University like wildfire. By the next morning, everyone in the music department knew about Professor Walsh's challenge. Students whispered about it in the hallways, debated it over lunch, and argued about it in their dorm rooms late into the night. Devin's roommate, Chris, was furious when he heard what happened. He stormed into their small dorm room that evening to find Devin sitting at his desk, reading through sheet music. Are you out of your mind? Chris said, dropping his backpack on the floor. Do you know what Walsh is doing? He's setting you up to fail in front of the entire school. This is humiliation, plain and simple. Devin didn't look up from the music. I know what he's doing. Then why did you agree to it? You could have just said no. You could have talked to the dean. This is discrimination, Devin. You don't have to put up with this. Devin finally looked up at his roommate. His face was calm, but there was something in his eyes that Chris had never seen before. Something that looked like quiet determination mixed with old pain. I said I'd do it, so I'll do it, Devin said simply. Chris sat down on his bed, shaking his head. Man, Rachmaninoff's Third is impossible. I've been playing piano for 12 years and I wouldn't even attempt it. The technical demands alone are crazy. And that's not even talking about the emotional interpretation. Concert pianists spend years preparing for that piece. I know, Devin said quietly. So what's your plan? Are you going to back out? Tell Walsh you changed your mind? Devin turned back to his sheet music. No, I'm going to practice, and that's exactly what he did. Starting that very night, Devin disappeared for hours at a time. Chris would wake up at 2 in the morning to find Devin's bed empty. He'd return from classes to an empty room. When Chris asked where he'd been, Devin would just say, "Practice rooms." The music building at Westbrook had a basement level that most students avoided. The practice rooms down there were older, slightly musty, and far from the main areas where everyone hung out. But they were also private and available at all hours. Devin claimed the smallest room at the end of the hall as his own, spending every free moment behind that soundproof door. He'd arrive with coffee and his worn notebook, sit at the old upright piano, and work through passages that would make experienced pianists nervous. His fingers moved across the keys for hours, repeating difficult sections over and over until muscle memory took over. But this wasn't new to him. These movements, these patterns, they lived somewhere deep in his bones, in a place where memory and instinct became one. Meanwhile, Professor Walsh was enjoying his week. He told the story to anyone who would listen, painting it as a teaching moment about standards and accountability. During a coffee break in the faculty lounge, he sat with 2 other professors, Dr. Robert Chen and Professor Linda Hayes, both of whom had taught at Westbrook for years. Sometimes students need a reality check, Walsh said, stirring sugar into his coffee. They come in thinking they can slide by on minimum effort. Well, not in my classroom. Classical music demands excellence, Professor Hayes frowned. Gregory, don't you think this is a bit harsh? Public performance under pressure like this, it seems designed to embarrass rather than educate. Nonsense, Walsh replied. If the young man is truly capable, he'll rise to the occasion. And if he's not, well, better he learns that now than later. I'm doing him a favor, really. Dr. Chen set down his coffee cup carefully. Have you considered that maybe this student is simply shy? Some of the most talented musicians I've known have been quiet, reserved people. Silence doesn't equal lack of ability. Walsh laughed dismissively. Robert, I've been teaching for 17 years. I know the difference between shy and unprepared. Trust me on this one. But Dr. Chen wasn't convinced. Something about the whole situation bothered him. That afternoon, he did something he rarely did. He went down to the basement practice rooms to listen. The building was quiet, most students having left for the day. But from the last room at the end of the hall, he heard piano music. He stood outside the door listening. The music was complex, technical, demanding. But more than that, it was beautiful. Whoever was playing understood the soul of the piece, not just the notes. Dr. Chen recognized it immediately. Rachmaninoff. And it was being played by someone with serious talent. He didn't knock. He didn't want to interrupt. He just listened for a few minutes, then walked away, his mind full of questions. By Wednesday, the upcoming assembly had become the talk of the entire campus. Students who normally wouldn't attend a music department event were planning to show up. Some wanted to support Devin. Others, more cruelly, wanted to see what they expected would be a spectacular failure. A few faculty members quietly discussed whether they should intervene, but no one wanted to step on Walsh's authority. Principal Davidson heard about the situation on Thursday morning. He was in his 60s, a fair-minded man who had dedicated his career to education and had seen just about everything in his 30 years as an administrator. His secretary mentioned the buzz around campus about Friday's assembly, and something in her tone made him pay attention. "What's this about?" he asked. She explained the situation carefully and tactfully, but Davidson could read between the lines. He called Walsh into his office that afternoon. "Gregory, I understand you've challenged a student to perform tomorrow." Walsh settled into the chair across from Davidson's desk, completely comfortable. "Yes, Devin Carter. Bright young man, but needs to understand the level of commitment required for advanced study. I think a public performance will be good for him." "And you think he's prepared for this?" "I think he'll do his best," Walsh said with a slight smile, "and that will be instructive for everyone." Davidson studied his music professor carefully. They had worked together for years, and Davidson had always respected Walsh's expertise. But something about this situation felt wrong. Still, he didn't have a clear reason to cancel the assembly. Students performed all the time. It was part of their education. "Just remember, Gregory, our job is to educate and encourage, not to tear down. I hope tomorrow serves that purpose." Walsh nodded, but inside he felt irritated. Everyone was being too soft, too concerned with feelings instead of standards. Tomorrow would prove his point. Tomorrow would show that excellence couldn't be faked. That evening, Devon practiced until midnight. The piece was coming together, but more than that, something inside him was awakening. Something he had locked away 3 years ago when the pain became too much to bear. The piano had been silent in his life for so long, touched only in required classes, played mechanically without feeling. But this week, preparing for what was meant to be his public humiliation, the music was returning. Really returning. Chris found him in their room at 1 a.m, sitting on his bed in the dark. "You okay, man?" Chris asked quietly. Devon was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "My mom used to play this piece, the Rachmaninoff. She'd practice it when she thought I was asleep, but I'd sneak out of bed and sit in the hallway just listening. I must have heard her play it 1,000 times. Where is she now?" Chris asked gently. "She died 3 years ago. Car accident. She was a professional pianist, played with symphonies, taught at a conservatory. Music was her whole life. And after she died, I couldn't play anymore. Couldn't even hear classical music without feeling like I was drowning." Chris sat down on his own bed, giving his roommate space. "Is that why you've been so quiet in Walsh's class?" Devon nodded in the darkness. "I came to Westbrook because it wasn't a conservatory. I thought I could study music theory, understand it from a distance without having to perform, without having to feel it all again. I just wanted to be around music without it hurting so much. And now?" Devon smiled slightly, though his eyes were sad. "Now Professor Walsh has given me a reason to stop hiding. Maybe he thinks he's exposing me as a fraud, but really, he's forcing me to face the one thing I've been running from. And honestly, I think I'm ready." Friday morning arrived cold and gray. Students made their way to the assembly hall earlier than usual, wanting to get good seats. Faculty members arrived in larger numbers than normal, curiosity and concern mixing in equal measure. By 11 o'clock, the hall was packed beyond capacity, with people standing along the walls and sitting in the aisles. Professor Walsh stood backstage, feeling confident and vindicated. This was it. The moment when standards would be upheld, when the truth would come out. He had his speech prepared, carefully worded to seem supportive while actually highlighting the gap between ambition and ability. Devon arrived 10 minutes before the assembly was scheduled to start. He wore simple black pants and a white shirt, nothing fancy. He carried no sheet music, no notes. Just himself and whatever courage he could gather from memories of his mother's hands moving across piano keys in the quiet hours of night. The moment of truth was about to arrive, and neither Professor Walsh nor anyone else in that packed auditorium had any idea what was about to happen. The assembly hall at Westbrook University had never been this full. Every seat was taken, and students lined the walls 3 deep. Faculty members stood in the back, some with arms crossed, others whispering nervously to colleagues. Even people from the local community had somehow heard about what was happening and showed up, curious to witness whatever was about to unfold. Principal Davidson stepped up to the microphone at exactly 11 o'clock. He was a tall man with gray hair and glasses that sat low on his nose. He had given hundreds of these assemblies over the years, but something felt different about this one. The energy in the room was electric, charged with anticipation and tension. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice steady and calm. "Thank you all for joining us today. As many of you know, our monthly music assembly is a time for us to celebrate the incredible talent we have here at Westbrook. Today's program features a special performance, and I'll now turn things over to Professor Walsh." The applause was polite but muted. Everyone knew this wasn't a normal assembly. This was something else entirely. Professor Walsh walked to the microphone with the confidence of someone who believed he was completely in control. He smiled at the audience, adjusted his tie, and began to speak. "Thank you, Principal Davidson. Today represents what I believe is an important moment in education. Classical music is not something to be taken lightly. It requires years of dedicated study, proper training, and most importantly, a deep respect for the tradition we carry forward." He paused, letting his words sink in. Some students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "I've invited one of my students, Devon Carter, to perform for us today. He has chosen to play the first movement of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3, which, as many of you know, is considered one of the most technically demanding pieces in the entire classical repertoire." A murmur went through the crowd. Those who knew music understood exactly what Walsh was saying. This wasn't just difficult. This was nearly impossible even for trained concert pianists. Walsh continued, his voice taking on a tone that seemed generous on the surface but had an edge underneath. Of course, if Devin feels that this particular piece is beyond his current abilities, he's more than welcome to choose something more suitable to his skill level. There's no shame in recognizing one's limitations. That's part of learning, after all. A few uncomfortable laughs rippled through parts of the audience. Others sat in stony silence, recognizing the setup for what it was. So without further delay, let me invite Devin Carter to the stage. The applause started scattered and uncertain. Some people clapped enthusiastically, wanting to support Devin. Others barely moved their hands, already expecting failure. Devin walked from the side entrance onto the stage. He moved steadily, his face calm and unreadable. He wore no performance outfit, no fancy concert attire, just his simple white shirt and black pants. He looked young, maybe too young to be attempting what he was about to attempt. He reached the grand piano at center stage, a beautiful instrument that the university was proud of. It was a Steinway, top of the line, the kind of piano that professional musicians dreamed of playing. Devin stood beside it for a moment, placing one hand gently on the polished wood surface, almost like he was greeting an old friend. Then he adjusted the bench, sat down, and positioned his hands above the keys. The hall fell completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Hundreds of people held their breath, waiting. Professor Walsh stood off to the side with his arms folded, that slight smile still on his face. He had expected Devin to look nervous, maybe even scared. But the young man seemed almost peaceful, lost in some private moment that no one else could access. Devin closed his eyes briefly. In his mind, he heard his mother's voice from years ago. Music isn't about proving anything to anyone, baby. It's about telling the truth. Your truth. Just let it speak through you. He opened his eyes, took one breath, and began to play. The opening notes of Rachmaninoff's Third Piano Concerto filled the assembly hall like a sudden storm. Devin's fingers moved across the keys with speed and precision that seemed impossible. The piece opened with cascading arpeggios, complex passages that required absolute control and perfect timing. Devin played them flawlessly. But it wasn't just the technical accuracy that caught everyone off guard. It was something else, something deeper. Devin was playing with emotion, with soul, with a kind of raw honesty that you couldn't fake or learn from a textbook. Every note carried weight. Every phrase told a story. In the audience, students who had been prepared to watch a disaster unfold now sat frozen, their mouths slightly open. Faculty members who had come out of morbid curiosity now leaned forward in their seats, unable to believe what they were hearing. Dr. Chen, who had listened outside the practice room days before, nodded slowly to himself. He had suspected, but now he knew for certain. This wasn't just talent. This was something extraordinary. Professor Walsh's smile had vanished. His arms slowly uncrossed as he stood there, staring at his student with an expression that moved from shock to confusion to something that looked almost like fear. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't possible. Where had this come from? Devin's hands flew across the keyboard, navigating the treacherous passages of the piece with confidence and grace. The concerto demanded incredible reaches, impossible jumps from one end of the piano to the other, moments where both hands had to play completely different rhythms at the same time. Devin handled it all like he had been born to do exactly this. The piece moved into the lyrical middle section, where the chaos settled into something heartbreakingly beautiful. Here, Devin's playing became even more powerful. His touch on the keys was delicate, almost tender, drawing out melodies that seemed to float in the air. Several people in the audience felt tears forming in their eyes without quite knowing why. Professor Hayes, sitting near the back, found herself crying openly. She had been teaching music for 20 years, and she had never heard a student play with this level of maturity and emotional depth. This wasn't the playing of a college freshman. This was the playing of someone who had lived through something profound, someone who understood pain and beauty in equal measure. Devin entered the final section of the movement, where the technical demands reached their peak. His fingers moved in blurs of motion, executing runs and passages that most pianists spent months just trying to learn. But Devin wasn't just executing them. He was owning them, making them his own, pouring everything he had into every single note. Chris, Devin's roommate, sat in the third row with his hands gripped tightly together. He was watching his friend transform before his eyes. The quiet, withdrawn person who barely spoke in class had become someone completely different at that piano. Someone confident, powerful, free. The music built and built, climbing toward the movement's conclusion. The entire audience was transfixed, pulled along by the current of sound that Devon was creating. It was like watching someone channel lightning, like witnessing something almost supernatural. Principal Davidson stood against the back wall, his mind racing. He pulled out his phone and quietly typed a search into Google. Devon Carter pianist. His eyes widened as the results loaded. He scrolled quickly, reading, his expression changing with each line. Professor Walsh remained frozen in place, still unable to process what was happening. His certainty, his smugness, his complete confidence that he was right about this student. All of it was crumbling with every note Devon played. He felt like the ground was disappearing beneath his feet. The final passages arrived, a virtuosic display of technical mastery that required everything a pianist could give. Devon leaned into the piano, his whole body engaged with the music, his face showing the intensity of the moment. His fingers struck the keys with power and precision, building to the movement's dramatic conclusion, and then, with one final cascade of notes, one last powerful chord, it was over. Devon's hands lifted from the keys. He sat there for a moment, breathing hard, his head slightly bowed. The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds, though it felt like an eternity. Then the assembly hall exploded. People leaped to their feet, applauding and shouting. The sound was deafening, a wall of noise that seemed to shake the building. Students cheered. Faculty members stood with their hands above their heads, clapping as hard as they could. Even the community members who had wandered in out of curiosity were on their feet, swept up in the moment. It wasn't just applause. It was celebration. It was a recognition. It was hundreds of people witnessing something they knew they would remember for the rest of their lives. Devon stood slowly and turned to face the audience. He gave a simple, modest bow. His face was calm, but his eyes glistened with emotion. He didn't smile triumphantly or gesture dramatically. He just acknowledged the response with quiet dignity, then walked steadily off the stage. The standing ovation continued for almost 3 full minutes. People didn't want it to end. They wanted to hold on to the feeling, the magic of what they had just witnessed. Professor Walsh stood motionless, his face completely white, as if all the blood had drained away. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire worldview collapse in the span of 15 minutes. And Principal Davidson, still holding his phone with the search results glowing on the screen, now understood exactly who Devon Carter really was. And the story was far more complicated and beautiful than anyone could have imagined. The chaos in the assembly hall continued even after Devon left the stage. Students crowded into the aisles, talking excitedly, some with tears still streaming down their faces. Faculty members stood in small groups, speaking in urgent whispers. The energy in the room was unlike anything Westbrook University had ever experienced. Principal Davidson didn't waste a second. He pushed through the crowd and found Professor Walsh still standing near the stage, looking like he had been struck by lightning. Davidson's face was stern, his jaw tight with controlled anger. "Gregory, my office, right now." Walsh seemed to snap out of his trance. He looked at Davidson, opened his mouth to say something, then closed it again. He simply nodded and followed the principal out of the assembly hall. People noticed them leaving, and more whispers spread through the crowd. The walk to Davidson's office felt like the longest journey of Walsh's life. His mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what had just happened. How had he been so wrong? Where had that level of talent come from? And more importantly, what was going to happen now? They reached the administrative building and climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor. Davidson's secretary looked up, surprised to see them, but the principal just motioned for her to hold all calls. He opened his office door and waited for Walsh to enter before closing it firmly behind them. "Sit down," Davidson said. It wasn't a request. Walsh sat in one of the leather chairs across from the principal's desk. Davidson remained standing for a moment, looking out the window at the campus below. Students were streaming out of the assembly hall, still animated, still buzzing with excitement. Finally, Davidson turned to face Walsh. He held up his phone, the search results still visible on the screen. "Do you know who Devon Carter is, Gregory?" Walsh shook his head slowly. "I know he's a freshman in my advanced theory class. I know he never participates, never shows any real engagement with the material. That's all you know?" Davidson's voice was sharp. In all these weeks, you never thought to actually learn about your student's background before you decided to publicly humiliate him? I wasn't trying to humiliate anyone, Walsh protested weakly. I was trying to establish standards to show that classical music requires proper preparation and respect. Davidson set his phone down on the desk and leaned forward, his hands flat on the surface. Devin Carter's mother was Catherine Carter. Does that name mean anything to you? Walsh's eyes widened. Catherine Carter? The Catherine Carter who played with the Chicago Symphony? The one who was considered one of the finest pianists of her generation? The very same. She died 3 years ago in a car accident, left behind a 15-year-old son who had already performed at Carnegie Hall at age 12. A child prodigy who was being groomed for an international concert career. Walsh felt sick. The room seemed to tilt around him. Davidson continued, his voice heavy with disappointment. Devin gave up performing after his mother died. According to these articles, he couldn't touch a piano for almost 2 years. The grief was too much. He came to Westbrook specifically because we're not a conservatory. He wanted to study music academically, to reconnect with it slowly without the pressure of performance. I didn't know, Walsh whispered. How was I supposed to know? You could have asked. Davidson's voice rose for the first time. You could have shown the slightest interest in your student as a human being, instead of making assumptions based on what exactly, Gregory? The question hung in the air between them. Walsh couldn't answer because the truth was too ugly to say out loud. He had made assumptions based on how Devin looked, where he came from, the fact that he didn't fit Walsh's narrow vision of what a classical music student should be. I've been the principal of this university for 12 years, Davidson said, his voice quieter now but no less intense. In that time, I've dealt with many difficult situations. But this is something else entirely. You took a grieving young man who was trying to heal through music, and you tried to break him in front of hundreds of people. Do you understand how serious that is? Walsh's hands were shaking. What happens now? Davidson walked around his desk and sat down heavily in his chair. He looked older, suddenly tired. What happens now is that you're going on immediate administrative leave. The dean will conduct a full review of your conduct. And Gregory, I'm going to be honest with you. Your future at this university is very much in question. Administrative leave? But I've been teaching here for 17 years. And in those 17 years, how many other students did you underestimate? How many other talented people did you overlook? Because they didn't match your preconceived notions. Davidson shook his head. That performance today wasn't just extraordinary. It was a window into who Devin Carter really is. And you completely missed it because you weren't looking. Walsh stood up, his legs unsteady. Can I at least apologize to him? Eventually, perhaps. But right now, I think you need to do some serious reflection on why this happened and what it says about you as an educator. Davidson pulled out a folder from his desk drawer. Take the rest of the semester. Think about whether teaching is really what you should be doing. Walsh left the office feeling like his entire world had collapsed. He walked through campus in a daze, barely noticing the students who stared at him as he passed. Word had already spread about what had happened in the assembly hall, and people knew that he had been the one who set up the challenge. Meanwhile, Devin had returned to his dorm room, emotionally exhausted. He sat on his bed, his hands still trembling slightly from the performance. Chris burst through the door moments later, out of breath. Dude, that was incredible. Everyone is talking about you. Do you know you're basically famous now? Devin gave a weak smile. I just want to sleep for about 12 hours. Sleep? Are you kidding? People want to meet you, talk to you. Professor Chen was asking where you went, and I saw at least 3 people recording on their phones. This is probably going to be all over social media by tonight. Devin's smile faded. That's what I was afraid of. Chris sat down, sensing his roommate's distress. Hey, what's wrong? You just gave the performance of a lifetime. You showed Walsh and everyone else who doubted you. You should be celebrating. I didn't do this to become famous, Devin said quietly. I did it because Walsh forced my hand. Because I needed to prove something to myself, not to him or anyone else. And now everything I've been trying to avoid is going to come back. What do you mean? Devin stood and walked to the window looking out at the campus. When my mom died, the press wouldn't leave me alone. They wanted interviews, pictures, statements about her legacy. They wanted me to perform at memorials to carry on her tradition. But I couldn't. I was just a kid who lost his mom, and they wanted me to be this symbol, this story. So I disappeared. Changed my plans, came here to Westbrook where nobody knew who I was. And now they'll find out, Chris said, understanding. Now they'll find out. As if on cue, Devon's phone started buzzing. Text messages, emails, social media notifications. They came in waves, each one from someone who had heard about the performance or seen a video. Some were supportive. Others were from reporters asking for interviews. A few were from old family friends he hadn't spoken to in years. Devon turned off his phone and set it on his desk. That evening, the video of Devon's performance had already been viewed thousands of times. Someone in the audience had recorded the entire thing and posted it with the caption, "Westbrook student delivers one of the most incredible piano performances I've ever witnessed." This is what real talent looks like. The comments section exploded. Musicians from around the country weighed in. Music professors shared it with their students. Professional pianists praised the technical mastery and emotional depth. Within 24 hours, the video had over 100,000 views. But buried in all those comments and shares was the real story. Someone recognized Devon and posted about his mother, about his childhood performances, about the tragedy that had taken him out of the public eye. The narrative shifted from amazing college student to tragic prodigy returns to music. And once that story got out, there was no stopping it. News outlets picked it up. Local television stations wanted interviews. National music magazines reached out to the university. Devon's private moment of healing, his quiet attempt to face his grief through music, had become public property. Principal Davidson tried to protect him, issuing a statement that Devon was a private student who deserved respect and space. But the story was too compelling, too perfectly dramatic for media to ignore. Through it all, Devon remained in his dorm room, trying to process everything. He had faced Professor Walsh's challenge and succeeded beyond anyone's imagination. He had played his mother's favorite piece and felt her presence with him through every note. He had proven to himself that he could still touch a piano without breaking apart. But now he had to figure out what came next. The performance was over, but its consequences were just beginning. And somewhere in the administrative building, Professor Walsh was facing consequences of his own, forced to confront the prejudices and assumptions that had defined his career. The video kept spreading. The views kept climbing. And Devon Carter, who had just wanted to study music quietly and heal in private, found himself at the center of a story that neither he nor anyone else could control anymore. By the next morning, the video had gone viral. Devon's life would never be the same again, and Professor Walsh's career hung by a thread, dependent on whether he could learn from his mistakes or whether some lessons came too late. 2 weeks passed before Professor Walsh gathered the courage to do what he knew he had to do. The administrative leave had given him plenty of time to think, maybe too much time. He spent his days in his empty house watching the video of Devon's performance over and over, each viewing making him feel worse about himself. The video had now been seen by millions of people. Music websites wrote articles about it. Famous pianists shared it on social media with comments like, "This is why we teach and raw talent meets genuine emotion." But in all those comments, in all that praise for Devon, there were also harsh words for Walsh. People called him out by name, criticized his teaching methods, questioned how someone with such obvious prejudice could be allowed to teach. Walsh read every comment, every article, every critique. He forced himself to face what he had done and why he had done it. The reflection was painful but necessary. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, he drove back to Westbrook University. He parked in the faculty lot but sat in his car for 10 minutes, building up courage. Finally, he got out and walked across campus. Students who recognized him whispered and pointed. He kept his head down and kept walking. He found Principal Davidson in his office working through paperwork. Davidson looked up when Walsh knocked on the open door. "Gregory," Davidson said, his tone neutral. "I wasn't expecting you." "I need to speak with Devon," Walsh said. "I know I have no right to ask, but I need to apologize to him properly." Face to face, Davidson studied him for a long moment. He's been through a lot these past 2 weeks. The media attention has been overwhelming for him. "Are you sure adding to that is the right thing to do?" "I'm not sure of anything anymore," Walsh admitted. "But I know I can't move forward until I at least try to make this right." Davidson picked up his phone and made a call. After a brief conversation, he hung up and looked at Walsh. "Devon says he'll meet with you. He's in practice room 7 in the basement." The same room he's been using all semester. Walsh felt his stomach tighten. Thank you. The walk to the music building felt longer than it should have. Walsh's footsteps echoed in the empty hallways as he made his way down to the basement level. The practice rooms were exactly as he remembered them, though he rarely came down here. This was student territory, a place where young musicians worked through their struggles away from judging eyes. He found practice room 7 at the end of the hall. The door was closed, but he could hear piano music coming from inside. Something gentle and melancholic. He stood there listening for a moment, then knocked softly. The music stopped. Come in, Devon's voice called out. Walsh opened the door. Devon sat at the old upright piano, the same one he had spent hours practicing on before the performance. He looked tired, Walsh noticed. The kind of tired that comes from dealing with too much attention, too many demands. Professor Walsh, Devon said, standing up. Please sit, Walsh said quickly. I'm the one who should be standing. Devon sat back down and Walsh remained near the door, suddenly unsure how to begin. He had rehearsed what he wanted to say dozens of times, but now all those prepared words seemed inadequate. I owe you an apology, Walsh finally said, not just for the challenge, but for everything. For every assumption I made about you from the first day of class, for never once trying to see you as a person instead of just a name on my roster. Devon listened quietly, his expression unreadable. Walsh continued, his voice shaking slightly. I spent 17 years teaching music, and I thought I was doing it right. I thought I was upholding standards, maintaining excellence. But what I was really doing was deciding who deserved a chance based on things that had nothing to do with talent or dedication. Why? Devon asked simply. Why did you assume I didn't belong? The question was direct and it deserved an honest answer. Walsh took a deep breath. Because you didn't fit the image I had in my head of what a serious music student should look like. And that says everything about my failures as a teacher and as a person. I judged you based on appearances, on stereotypes I didn't even realize I was holding on to, and I'm deeply, deeply sorry. Devon was quiet for a moment, then said, You weren't just testing my abilities. You were trying to humiliate me in front of everyone. Do you understand how cruel that was? I do now, Walsh said, and there were tears in his eyes. I've watched that performance 50 times, and each time I see more clearly what I almost destroyed. You weren't just playing piano that day. You were sharing something precious, something that meant everything to you, and I tried to use it as a weapon against you. My mother used to tell me something, Devon said, looking at the piano keys. She said music was the only truly honest language in the world. That when you play, you can't hide who you really are. Everything you feel, everything you've experienced, it all comes through in the notes. She was right, Walsh said. That day on stage, I wasn't playing for you or the audience. I was playing for her, for the memory of every time she sat with me at the piano, teaching me that music wasn't about perfection or impressing people. It was about truth. Devon looked up at Walsh. And the truth is, I almost gave up music forever because of grief. Your challenge, as cruel as it was meant to be, actually gave me a reason to face that piano again, to face my grief and my fear. Walsh wiped his eyes. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Maybe not, Devon said honestly. But I'm going to give it to you anyway. Not because you've earned it, but because holding on to anger hurts me more than it hurts you. My mom wouldn't want me carrying that weight around. The two men sat in silence for a moment. Then Walsh asked, What will you do now? I've seen the offers pouring in. Concert halls, music festivals, recording contracts. Devon smiled slightly. I'm going to finish my degree. I'm going to study music theory and composition. And maybe when I'm ready, I'll perform again. But on my own terms, in my own time. The world can wait. That's very wise, Walsh said. I learned it from watching you, Devon said, and Walsh looked up in surprise. I learned that proving something to other people is never worth it. The only person I need to prove anything to is myself. Walsh nodded slowly. I'm taking a semester off. Maybe longer. I need to figure out if I should even be teaching anymore. That's up to you, Devon said. But if you do come back, maybe you could try seeing your students for who they really are instead of who you think they should be. I will, Walsh promised. If they give me that chance. Devon stood up and extended his hand. Walsh shook it, feeling the strength in the young man's grip. The same hands that had created such beautiful music now offered forgiveness to someone who didn't deserve it. Thank you, Walsh said, for being a better person than I was a teacher. Devon walked Walsh to the door. Before the professor left, Devon said one more thing. You know what's funny? After everything that happened, I'm actually grateful. Not for the cruelty, but for what it forced me to face. Sometimes the hardest moments teach us the most important lessons. Walsh left the music building feeling lighter than he had in weeks. He knew he still had a long journey ahead, learning to confront his own biases and prejudices. The dean's review would determine his professional future. But regardless of what happened, he knew he was a different person than he had been 2 weeks ago. Devin returned to the piano and began playing again. The music that filled the small practice room was different now. Less sad, more hopeful. It was the sound of someone who had walked through fire and come out stronger on the other side. The video of his performance continued to spread, inspiring young musicians around the world. But Devin stayed focused on his studies, on his healing, on reconnecting with music in a way that honored his mother's memory without being consumed by grief. He declined most interview requests, but agreed to one with a small music education magazine. When they asked him what message he had for young musicians facing doubt or discrimination, he said simply, "Don't let anyone else define your worth or your talent. Play for yourself first. Play for truth. The rest will follow." Professor Walsh eventually returned to teaching, but he was different, humbler, more careful, more willing to listen and learn from his students instead of just lecturing at them. Some students forgave him. Others didn't. He accepted both responses as consequences of his actions, and on quiet evenings when the music building was nearly empty, Devin could sometimes be found in practice room 7, playing pieces his mother had loved. The notes would drift through the hallways, a reminder that music, in the end, was about healing, connection, and the courage to be honest about who we really are. The story of what happened in that assembly hall became legendary at Westbrook University. But the real story, the one that mattered most, was quieter and more personal. It was about a young man finding his way back to joy through the very thing that had caused him pain. And about a teacher learning that the most important lessons sometimes come from the students we underestimate the most.